Awesome. Okay, we're going to get started now. We got the recording going so that we'll have this online later. Welcome to the Arizona PHP user group. Thanks for coming tonight. How many people are here for the first time? Okay, I thought so. I thought there was quite a few people. So who came for React.js? Who is that? What is that what brought you here? Wait, keep them up, keep them up, keep them up. Okay, and who came because there was pizza? Okay, yeah, said that. All right. So the basic way that we run these meetings, we have announcements first, then we have presentations. We have a raffle, and up here you'll see all of the wonderful prizes that are going to be available. I might actually need to get some more tickets from you, judging on how many people are here. If you didn't sign in, please make sure to sign in. That helps us track how many people we had. I'm seeing a lot of name tags, so that's good. I see one person without a name tag. Oh, my telepathy's not working. He'll figure it out later. Afterwards, the raffle, if you wouldn't mind sticking around and helping us put the tables back where they go, they are kind of in a boardroom setting normally. So if you want to hang out, do that. Then afterwards, we'll head down to Mill Avenue for those of you who want to stick around and just do whatever. So if you have any ideas on a place to go, keep that in mind too, because I'm not good at deciding that. So our sponsors for the group, we have some great sponsors that have helped us out. Synapse Studios is one of them. I got a few people here tonight from Synapse Studios. Why don't you guys raise your hands? Hire, especially you, hire. There you go. They're hiring, so I'll give them a minute to describe that in just a second. But they cover our venue space. So we're really grateful for them for paying for that, because otherwise it's coming out of someone's pocket here, and that's no fun. Another sponsor tonight, Vincent Benjamin. They graciously decided to feed us some pizza, so thank you. We'll just give them a little clap there. And I know they have some cool PHP jobs available through their company, so let them talk here in just a minute. This is what we call the open mic portion of the meeting, so I'll give Synapse Studios a minute if you have something, one of you, to, like, if you're hiring.
I'll just say something, I guess. These guys will hear more from me in a minute. Yep. But so all of our designers are moving to Seattle, so this is a problem for us. So we're hiring people who know or want to learn React and also know UX and UI, and we're also hiring PHP and Node developers. I think we're hiring. We really want like a senior developer, but I think we're interviewing, all the way up, the whole experience level. So if you guys are interested in working in Node, PHP, Slim Frameworks, APIs, with single page application React front ends, and you are a designer or a developer, come talk to me, Gordon here, even Adam you can talk to. He's back there, and we will hook you up with the people you need to email. So there you go.
Thank you. And I'll give Vincent Benjamin folks here chance. You want to use the microphone, or you good back there?
Well, I mean, I probably do. But Tammy and I, Michael, or Vince, as half the people probably call me, are from Vincent Benjamin. Thank you for tolerating our presence here. We know how much everybody loves recruiters in this industry, so we try to be a little bit more of the tech-centric, focused in IT group. You can ask a couple of guys in this room. I think we've all got new jobs before, so feel free to advocate for us when you're not on the spot. That being said, we are working on a number of jobs for people that would be in this room. A handful of PHP jobs, backfilling full Tim's class positions, and WebPT. So if you guys are interested in working there, I've got your entrance in the door. So feel free to drop Tammy or I a note. But if you come from other backgrounds other than PHP, if you're a JS guy, Ruby dude, whatever it is, we are about 80% focused in development only. So we're not going to be wasting your time talking about the Java from the JavaScript group. We're not going to be wasting your time talking about .NET goals if you're a network guy. So we try to be a little bit more on point, right? So feel free to drop us a note. We'd be happy to help. We are big advocates of meetups and sponsors of other small groups too. So feel free to hit us up. We're local. We're a local startup too. So we try to be a little bit more advocate.
Awesome, thanks. And I got an email from them, and one of the jobs they have is a 6-figure job in PHP. So if that's interesting to you,
3 of the jobs.
Definitely want to talk to them.
So you're at that borderline.
Mike's got me a couple jobs. Probably got me a couple more before the next couple years are over.
Yeah.
He's absolutely, hands down, unequivocally the best recruiter I've ever worked with. So if you're looking for a job or want a better job or just want to get a free beer out of him,
He loves that.
definitely give him your ear. I've worked with so many recruiters, and most of them are dreadful. But Michael over there, and I assume the rest of the Venture Benjamin team, based
Thanks
on
for leaving me out,
Yeah.
Sam.
based on his qualifications, I'm sure they're all equally as wonderful. He's not like the rest of them.
I'll second that. John Wolf is placed me like
You're Jack.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
just started last week. That's
Thanks,
right.
does anyone else have any job openings? Anyone looking for a job? Anyone have a project or anything they want to talk about?
Sure. Josh Eichhorn, CTO at Pagely. We have a PHP developer position open, so it's going to be a full stack role using Laravel and then unchosen JavaScript framework on the front end side. So it's working with building out a new version of our admin portal. We do managed WordPress. So if you are interested, hit me up afterwards. Thanks.
Cool. Anyone else have something they wanted to share? Okay. Awesome. So we're talking about JavaScript today, but I can't, have a PHP meetup without doing a little bit of PHP, right? So I prepared a trivia question. Let's see if anyone knows the answer to this. So PHP has some functions that are aliases of each other. For example, join and implode are aliases. They do the same thing. Exit and die, they do the same thing. But there's actually 3 functions, a trio of functions, that are all aliases of each other. There's only one instance of that. Does anyone know what those 3 functions are? That's just 2. There's 3 that are the same.
One of them's gonna be old.
Question mark.
Split, explode, and
Those are almost aliases of each other. Whoever gets it gets to pick the first raffle prize.
yeah, I'm working on that. Go.
Are they all methods?
Yeah, 3 functions that do the same thing.
I set, I alter, and
Yeah.
Can't believe that aren't just there.
Yeah, there's a lot of pairs.
Are they scared?
No, not really.
I bet one of them has to be a scared. The third one's got to be some goofball one. It's PHP 4.
All right. If I give you any more time, you guys are going to start looking it up. So, all right, here we go.
Thanks for doing that right in front of the recruiters too. That's really sweet.
Is float, is double, is real. They're all exactly the same. Is real is the obscure one, I think, of those. All right, I thought that'd be fun. Yeah. There is not. Yeah. Not is real. All right, so without any further ado, Aaron, you're up.
All right. Now I just have to do this thing where I shuffle browser tabs. All right, how's that look to everybody? Looking okay? All right, hey guys, I'm Aaron. I'm going to talk to you about React a little bit, mostly an intro talk. So we're all PHP developers in some fashion or another. That means most of us probably had to do some JavaScript. Everybody who has had to do JavaScript in their life, how much of you guys hate it? So I've learned to love JavaScript, but I won't evangelize too much. But the reality is that, you know, it's a big deal. It's becoming a bigger deal. And one of my favorite ways to write an application is to split your front end and back ends completely. So, you know, I used to write PHP applications where we'd have templates on the back end and you would have an HTTP request and you would serve up your template just right through the web server. And that's perfectly fine for a lot of applications. But I find that one of my favorite way to build an application is to keep my backend as an API. And when you're building your API, you focus solely on your data model, how you're accessing data, and how you're sending out data to the world. And then, you know, more often than not, when I'm writing an application, the world means just my front-end application. But that means that I get to do whatever I want in my front-end application. I can switch up tech stacks if I need to. I can build a mobile application that consumes the same API. And it's a really flexible way to write an application. And I think that a lot of PHP developers are actually full-stack developers. You end up writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in your life, and, you know, maybe you hate it, and maybe you don't. But I find that React is a really great framework to build your front ends with. And React is actually, they don't like to think of it as a framework. They think of it as a library to build user interfaces, which is why I put that up there. That's all over their website. You can use React pretty slimly. That's been like a topic on Twitter today, and I kind of wished that I had covered it a little bit more in the presentation. Because the way I'm going to talk about React is the way that I use it, which is as essentially a front-end framework for building a single-page application. And so with that, don't think that you can't use it if a lot of the stuff that I talk about is super complicated, because, you know, I have to run a compiler and I have to run you know, a dev server, and I use like hot loading and stuff like that when I'm doing my dev environment. And a lot of that's pretty daunting, but it's actually pretty easy to get started if you just go through their little, you know, hello world, which I can show you guys where all that documentation and stuff is. It's really cool. Anyway, with that, I'm going to get started. So again, I introduced myself. I'm Aaron Bruce. I work at Synapse Studios. I already talked to you guys about, you know, we're hiring. So I'm not going to cover that too much. We have been using React for a little bit over 2 years as a company, which is kind of ancient in the React world. And that's pretty cool. It gives us a really like unique position that I get to, you know, I get to talk about React and the changes it's gone through and the ecosystem of React as it's kind of matured. You know, the API used to change much more frequently than it does now. And it was hard to keep up with. It's a little bit more stable now. We've been using it in production this whole time, and we like it a lot. We've all been to, maybe not all of us, but we've all gone to the React conference at the Facebook headquarters, or, you know, we send people to these things, and we try and learn a lot about it. We work really hard to try and be an authority about it. We're not exactly an authority, but we know a lot about it. We use it every day. Anyway, so that's who I am. That's where I work. Those are sort of my credentials. So React was created by Facebook. And whatever you feel about the application of Facebook, you have to admit that the guys at Facebook are pretty smart. And when they were building React, they had, you know, a set of problems that they needed to solve, and at a scale that most of us were never going to have to touch. But the scale gives them a really unique insight into the things that are important to them. So one super important thing for Facebook is that when they build their interfaces, they want it to be reusable. When you think about the comment box, you know, that text input, that's the same text input they use all over their whole website. It's this user interface, it's this chunk. It's actually built in React. and they use it everywhere you're entering text on the Facebook.com website. And it provides a bunch of really cool functionality, all the hashtag stuff, and at mentioning your friends, and all that stuff is built into this text input, and it's used everywhere. 2, it has to be super fast. React is used by like a billion people, right? There are a billion active users is the stat. I don't know if that's, you know, quantify real or not, but that's what you hear. So they need it to be pretty quick. It's a big deal. It's a lot of people's time. They can't have a slow seeming application. And the data model has to be easy to reason about, which is a phrase that they use a lot that I first heard from Paul in that back corner over there. They want to make it so that when you're looking at their code base, the new guys coming in will not have to struggle too hard to understand how the data gets to their component or even care about it most of the time. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through these 3 bullet points and talk about some of the ways that React accomplishes these goals. And I'm going to start with reusable. The way React makes reusable user interfaces is with components. You may have heard of like web components, which is I don't know a whole lot about it, but it's kind of a similar idea in that they're like bundles of user interface that can be moved around, copied, reused all over the place, and it combines code into a single place. So React does the same thing. They're plain JavaScript objects. They extend this component class that Facebook gives you in the React object. There's a little bit of a catch. Typically, you're using JSX in them. And I think for the most part, when people first look at React, they see JSX and they immediately hate it. Excuse me. But I'm going to try, this is the evangelizing I'm going to do, is I'm going to try and convince you guys that JSX is cool. So 3, in order to have reusability, you have these things called props. And if you think of a component as a function or an object, you can think of props as the parameters that go into the function. And then fourth part is that React components are stateful. They can know about themselves. They can store data in themselves, and they can control things about themselves. So think like whether or not a modal is visible. Think whether or not a menu is open. I tend to try and keep my state and my components super simple like that. You can kind of overdo it if you want, but that's as it gets more complicated, you end up doing some different things that I'll talk about in a minute. So with that, I'm going to show you guys some code. Last time I showed this code slide looked super awful. I'm really happy that it looks good now. This is a component. This is a component in just about its simplest state. For those of you who've been out of the JavaScript world for a long time and maybe don't care about JavaScript too much, I'm using ES 2015 syntax. You get class things that are really just wrappers around JavaScript objects. They just make it look prettier. So here it is. In its simplest form, a component is a JavaScript object which, 1, extends component. And if you're not using the class syntax, they have a React.createClass thing for you to use. It extends component, and it has a render method. Inside of that render method is the JSX. And right here, this JSX looks like HTML because it is. It's just HTML. And it's in your JavaScript file. And for those of us who've been doing this for 10 years and writing PHP, we know that you don't put JavaScript or HTML in your JavaScript files. It's one of the worst things you can do. It's awful. We did it all the time when I worked with Tim and Jeff, and I would open up these files and I would see JavaScript in them and I'd hate it. Or I would see HTML in these JavaScript files and I knew it was wrong. Turns out, if you do it right, it's not wrong. And this is a concept that actually, again, Paul taught me when I first started at Synapse, is that we think of separation of concerns. The old way to think about separation of concerns is that you don't have HTML and CSS together. You keep your styles in your style sheets, your HTML and your template files, your JavaScript and your JS files, and your PHP and your PHP files. And they're all separate. These are separate concerns. It turns out there's another way to think about separation of concerns. I think somebody at my last talk spoke about it as that's kind of a horizontal way to think about the separation of concerns. You can also separate concerns vertically. So when I think about this component, which I've created here, I've got an album. And it's a block of display on the website, and you can actually see the album here as written up there. My concern isn't the CSS being separate from the JavaScript. My concern is that unit of interface. I care about what's going on right there. If I want to change the way that looks, if I want to change the order of the name in the album, the artist in the album, if I want to do stuff like that, that should all be in the same file. You know, I don't want to run around to like 4 different files to change how this looks. It was kind of like when I started working in JSX, I was super skeptical, but I'm totally bought into this idea. So hopefully that kind of helps convince you guys, because I'm actually super into it. Yes?
Does your IDE complain about that?
No. No, it doesn't. Because JSX has become popular enough now that you'll find yeah, I mean, I'm sure NetBeans, I know I saw you using NetBeans in your thing. I'm sure there's a plugin if not. Atom is great. I use Vim these days, and so you have so there's typically you're gonna have plugins or your linter or whatever.
That's not a simplified view. That's actually a string.
Yeah, no. This is what it looks like, and I'm going to show the code because I did remove some style stuff from this to show it in this thing. But I'm going to show the actual component here in a minute. This is what it looks like in the file. It's not wrapped in strings. This is what it looks like, and the reality is that once you start using JSX, you do have to run it through a transpiler to get it down to native JavaScript. And so that's how it works behind the scenes. That's typically what you're doing when you're writing a single page app anyway. So hopefully it's not going to introduce an onerous step into your development environment. There are kind of ways around it by including like a script that transpiles, in the browser. Depending on what you're working on, that might make sense. But anyway, the question was, yeah, so this is how it looks in your editor, and I'll super show that in a minute. So I'm going to move on. And I'm going to show them being reusable. This is, so here I have the definition of an album component. And here I have the use of the album component to display 2 albums. And you can see here that everything's hard-coded. I've got the word darling side birdsay and the image source just hard-coded right into the component itself. And here, when I just use it twice, I get to have that thing twice. And when you see this, you're just seeing HTML elements, and it's not super special looking to you. But when you see this, you should see that I made my own HTML element, and I got to put it on the page. And that HTML element means display these 3 things this way. And it means that every time. And that's super powerful, and I love it. So next, how do we get the stuff that we care about into the component? That's what props are. I talked about props being like the parameters of a function. That's how they work. You just pass them in, and here you see me using them. Excuse me. I'll show you how you get them in a minute. But this is me just dumping them right into the JSX. You see me wrapping them in curly braces. That's how you tell the JSX compiler that this part is actual JavaScript, and don't try and render it, and don't try and build it into HTML. And so this is the dynamic data going into my component. You can see it renders exactly the same way, because the data I pass it is the exact same data from before. So now I get to use my album component twice, passing it 2 different sets of data. It displays both sets of data the exact same way, but you get a cool reusable HTML element that takes these, what you can think of as attributes on the HTML element as your data, and it displays predictably. And I know that if I want to change the way that album displays, I go to album.js or album.jsx, and I mess with it there. And it's wonderful. Life is great. And again, so you can see the props coming in. And this is like sort of a fake show off. So I'm going to talk about state a little bit. So the state of a component is what it knows about itself. So I wrote this component to know whether or not it's selected, meaning when I click on it, it's selected, and when I click on it again, it becomes it's no longer selected. So I do this with the on-click listener. You can see there in the div tag. That should look pretty familiar to everybody who does JavaScript and HTML. If not, when you click on it, it just fires my function. My function is above. It's called toggle select, and it calls this .setState. And that's a function provided by React, and it's just a way to both, one, store the data, and two, listen for changes to the data. When state changes, it calls render again. And that's true of props also. So if state or props changes, the render function gets called once more. So in my render function, it's just a simple function that looks at whether or not the selected flag is true or false, and then changes the background color. So when I look at my render function, I know super straightforward simply what's going on. I know that if I'm selected, I add style.background color equals my hex color right there. If I'm not selected, then I don't add that. And then that's 100%, that's all that's happening. And there's nothing going on in another file somewhere. I know exactly what's going on. And then I get to show off by saying that I built this whole thing in React, and I can click on it, and you can watch it working. So now I can go back and show that, indeed, these albums, they know about their own state. They don't care about the state of the other album. They toggle themselves on and off. Everything that knows about whether or not that background should be blue is contained in the album.js file. And now I'm going to show you the album.js file. In Vim, of all things. So here we are, album.js. You can see that there's some things you didn't see in the slide. Down here, I have a styles object, which stores my CSS. You can use style sheets with React. In fact, we do at Synapse. I don't have to care about that because we have designers and they do a good job, and I don't look at it. So, but you'll find that a lot of people are very much into the idea of storing the styles for your component locally into these objects like I have here. And that's how I prefer to do it because I'm a developer and I'm not worried about, problems with cascading and collisions and all that stuff. So I just store my styles simply in here when I'm doing demos. So that's the main difference, is me just adding style things to make the thing look the way it did. And everything else works exactly the same. You can see that, my toggle select, here in the constructor, I have to bind this to it because that's just a thing that happens when you're using this class syntax, is you have to bind it with the appropriate scope. And that's a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm talking about today, but here's my toggle select function that calls this.setState. Selected equals not the current state. So it just reverses what it was. And that's all the logic. And again, if I want to change the way those albums look, I come here and I change it. I don't have to go when I have the CSS right here too. I change the CSS right here. I change the JavaScript and the HTML all in one place, and life is wonderful. So, question?
Is this.state and this.props built into the
They're built into, so you see on the extending component up here. They come for free from the component class when you extend it. That's one of the things that React gives you is state and props. So you have those objects.
When it's transbound, it's like one click quoted, or is it not seeing like a proper HTML markup there with quotes?
Yeah, you won't. Yeah, so no, this isn't, that's not HTML. It's not proper HTML. It's JSX. So you see JSX, which behind the scenes gets compiled into the correct thing, and it gets compiled pretty well into working with every browser, including I don't know how far back it goes, but I know we've had to support it in IE8 at least. So it's pretty good. It's a pretty good compiler. We haven't had any problems with it. I would say by far the compilation step is annoying to have to deal with sometimes, but again, if you're using any sort of common JS patterns, you probably have some sort of build step anyway, and this fits right into that perfectly. So
there?
Yeah, absolutely. He was just getting my attention for you.
So you were saying when you say set state that runs render every time,
Yes.
does render also pull and render that style every time? Does it update style?
Yeah, it'll run the style and render that little component. So if I change the styles in between, then that's what's happening. Is that
Styles not tell that state between things. It actually gets read style.
yeah. Yeah, so that little block gets re-rendered the whole time. And the I think the typical alternative is that you end up you know, refreshing a whole page or doing whatever. And it turns out I'm going to talk about performance a little bit, which I think is what you're starting to get at. Oh no, yeah.
I was curious to me that you update the state and it sets the background code, but you toggle it off and it sets back.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that you're programmatically setting back. It's just like it's flushing the style.
Absolutely. That's actually a super important way to think about how React works, is that it calls render, it looks at its current state, and then sets itself, and essentially like this block of UI gets blown away and then rebuilds. Yeah, it turns out to be a super powerful way to build your UIs also.
Sorry, just to tag on to that really quick. So that's truly typical to have the inline style in there like that, so that way it constantly flushes.
We don't do that. So instead of doing the inline style, we'll typically add a class or remove a class.
Okay.
So you'll see the style done this way, the way I had, sorry, I removed it from the screen. You'll see this in a lot of examples. A lot of people giving talks do this because it's easy. But I'm not sure how much in the real world it's done. A lot of times you see it when people package up components for reuse by, you know, as a library, which is another powerful feature of this, is that, you know, there are existing components that you can use that other people have written, you know, things, date pickers, all the things that you think of as jQuery plugins. There's probably an analog in React. It's newer, so you might find less things or fewer things. But for the most part, you know, the common things that you want are going to be available. But yeah, so that's how we do it. Long-winded answer is we add and remove classes, and we build our CSS with Sass and whatever those guys are doing. I haven't touched CSS in a long time, so I'm not going to do it for a presentation up in front of 40 people. So, but yeah, so it turns out it's you know, you don't have to mess with the style sheet and reload it every time. It's just the style sheet. What's up?
So if you're blowing away that component re-rendering each time, I would think that when you start aggregating components together, like your album list, and let's say you've got 40 album items in that list, if you change your state on your album list, then you have to blow away the entire thing and re-render all 40 album components.
Yes, it depends. I will talk about performance in a moment. I have answers to those questions, and then we can talk about it in more depth. I'm actually probably going to be getting to it right now. But I first want to talk about this thing that we all know and hate, performance. So React is super fast. That was one of the things that Facebook needed. So I know we're talking about blowing away and re-rendering parts of the DOM, and that sounds really slow. But React is actually incredibly fast. And so to get started, to introduce that topic, we have to talk about the DOM a little bit. So I looked up facts from Wikipedia about the DOM. So the DOM was invented in 1995 by Netscape. They call this the legacy DOM. It only existed in Netscape. Then the intermediate DOM was, and then I think IE copied the legacy DOM, and they had a bunch of inconsistencies. Then we have the intermediate DOM where it starts to get standardized in 1997. Actually, no, I was wrong. I apologize. The intermediate DOM is I believe when IE starts using it. And then 98, it gets standardized. So then it starts to look the same between the two. Not quite standardized even today. 2000, we get element by ID, which I think most of us have probably used. That happened in 2000, 16 years ago, you guys. In 2004, 4 years later, 12 years ago, the DOM we use today was invented and standardized. So all this to start, the DOM sucks, you guys. It's 12 years old. We all know it sucks. It's a huge pain. We have jQuery because the DOM sucks. So jQuery was invented because everybody hates using get element by ID and referencing DOM elements that way. So we wrapped the DOM. We decided we didn't want to deal with it. We used jQuery instead. And that's what I used for most of my career up until I started working at Synapse 2 years ago when I started using React. So Facebook invented, or I don't want to say Facebook invented, I don't know who invented it. Facebook made popular the idea of the virtual DOM. It turns out the DOM is so terrible that it's easier and faster and better to make a copy of it and mutate the copy of the DOM and then write changes back to the actual DOM. So in the DOM itself, there's a lot of unnecessary garbage. It's a memory hog. It's stupid. It's slow. So they copy it with a virtual DOM. They remove the things that you don't need, and then they really quickly in memory, when you make changes in React, it makes changes to the virtual DOM, and then the virtual DOM's changes flush to the actual DOM in a super, super efficient way. So these render calls that I'm talking about, these are impacting the virtual DOM, which is an incredibly fast mutation. And then everything gets rewritten, and like they do a diff of the current DOM. They say these are the things that have changed. They only re-render, they only inject things into the DOMs that have changed, and it turns out to be incredibly super fast. And in fact, I like to say that React is great because of the virtual DOM, but I think that the virtual DOM has been such a success that, for one, it's a standalone thing. You can get it and use it your own. Two, I don't see why any other JavaScript framework would ever, like they're probably implementing this or have implemented it into their frameworks. So Angular probably will get it or has gotten it. I don't know much about it. Ember, all the other competitors, every new competitor, until the DOM is actually good, every new competitor will use this too. It's awesome. So with that, did that start to answer the performance question? I'm going to get into it a little bit more. So one important idea in React is that you should only render when you have to. So what I talked about before is when your component's props change or when your state changes, because your component is a, you'll hear the phrase state machine, and you have control over, one, your component's state, and you know about your component's props. Your component doesn't need to re-render if the state doesn't change and the props don't change. Nothing has changed about it. It doesn't need to call render. So Facebook provides us with this should component update function. It's not implemented by default. You have to implement it yourself, sort of. They give you the pure render mixin. As a mixin, you include on your components, and it does kind of a naive comparison of your state and props. It just says like, it loops through your props and says, does prop A equal prop A, previous prop equal, next prop? Yes, then don't render. So those of you who know how JavaScript works will understand that if you have complicated objects, it's hard to do just an equality comparison between them. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but there's a solution to that problem. It turns out we use immutable.js, which means that it's a library provided by Facebook. I don't actually change when I use immutable.js. The objects that I have don't change themselves. I make a copy of it essentially every time I make a mutation to it. This also turns out to be incredibly fast. They keep these diffs, and it's super smart, way smarter than I am. So we use, in order to take advantage of should component update in a really advanced way, you use immutable objects. And I'll talk to anybody who wants to talk to it about immutable stuff, but I wanted to keep it a little bit lighter than that. And they, again, provide a second method for you if you're not going to use pure render mixin called shallow compare, which does a super basic, does current x equal next x, no, don't render, or yes, don't render, no, do render. So I have a demo. This is my second moment to show off in the whole situation. This is my demo of should component update. Again, I'm not a designer, but So I've got this index file. I built a small little app, and I'm going to explain a little bit of how it works. I'm going to step away from the microphone, but I assume you can all hear me. Each of these boxes is a component. So each of the big boxes are quadrant components. This is each of the middle boxes is something called, like, I don't remember what I named it, like middle component or something like that. And each of the small boxes is inner component. So there are 3 total components, each used 4 times. The number inside is how many times each component has been rendered. So this page has been loaded, every component rendered once. At the top, I have a checkbox. And that checkbox tells the application whether or not it should use should component update. Right now, should component update is off. So that means every time I change the props or the state of any of these that the render has to be called. And because sorry guys, I lied. There's one more component on the page. The one more component is the application as a whole. So there's one super component that keeps track of the state on itself of everything else. These guys don't actually have their own state. The state is all on the global application component. So when the state changes of the global application component, it has to re-render itself. And because it's calling its own render function, when should component update is off, you'll see that each of these boxes will be rendered again. And one final detail is that the render trigger, the state, the count will be incremented when I click on each component. So hopefully that's not too complicated and well explained.
Like you're setting up for a really hard interview question.
I'm not. I'm setting up for one of the coolest demos you'll ever see. But anyway, so when I click anywhere on this page, the state updates in the main application. The main application re-renders itself, and the render flows down the tree, and all the components re-render themselves. But when I turn on should component update, the state changed in the application because I flipped the thing. So everything re-rendered again. Now it's on. Now the only things that need to re-render are the things that I click on and their immediate parents and all the way up the tree. And I can explain more about why that's the case in a minute. It gets into a little bit of details, but now I can click on anything. And when I clicked on that inner component, the application had to re-render as a whole. The upper right quadrant had to re-render. The upper right middle and the upper right inner all had to re-render because I was clicking on this guy in the middle, or in the inside. Once I click the guy in the middle, the inside, nothing changes. It doesn't need to re-render itself, nor does the rest of the quadrants. Nothing else has to change, only these 2 numbers. And so only those 2 numbers, only those 2 boxes re-render. And same as you go up. And this is really, really powerful because when you have your UI on the page and you have something complicated happening, it only really needs to be happening at that spot. You don't need to incur this penalty of re-rendering across the whole app. So only the thing that changes needs to re-render. So you can design your app, your list of albums, such that if you add something to it, the rest of the list doesn't necessarily, each of those list elements don't necessarily have to re-render. And thus you get super fast, optionally, performance. Yeah?
Just be totally clear, the way that each of these components is set up, 13 is inside 18, which is inside 20.
Absolutely, yeah.
In your render component.
And I'll show it. I'll show the code for it. It's a long file and it's a little bit crazy. I have it on GitHub if anybody's interested to pour through it. But ultimately, yes, that's what's happening. When you see the JSX, what you see is an outer application component, and then you see the 4 quadrants being rendered, and then you see inside each quadrant component, the inner component, and inside each middle component, you see the inner component. So they're just nested down into this tree, and you end up with a deep tree. What's up?
So Aaron, just on obviously, sorry guys, I'm the lay guy in the room, so I want to make sure I'm on the same page. So this is the feature functionality within React that allows me, when I'm cruising on my Facebook wall, if I like a post, I don't have to reload the entire view for all of my wall. Right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The details of that might be inaccurate because I'm not sure that Facebook uses React across the whole page, but it is that's the idea. It makes doing that easier. Doing that's kind of hard in a lot of other frameworks, and React makes it pretty easy, especially when you think about it on the component level, because only your component needs to know about when it needs to re-render. So when you define should component update on your component, you don't have to think about the things that are next to it, the things that are above it. It gets state and it gets props, and you say, given those things, do I need to re-render? Super easy to reason about, hopefully. Yes, what's up?
Is that something you have to manually define though? Like what properties that you care about, or whatever comparison?
So that's what I was talking about a little bit over here. You kind of have to manually define. You have to manually define that you want to run should component update. The basic example is you include this mixin. It provides should component update for you, and it runs shallow compare for you. So it's a one-liner piece of code that does the most.
Always in your hands to decide.
Whether or not to do that. Yeah, and then you can override it and have a more complicated set of conditions for whether or not you should render. But the basic condition, the one that I use most is this shallow compare method that's here. I don't actually use the shallow compare in most of my day-to-day because I'm not using the class syntax at work so much, but I will show it in the code here in a minute. What's up?
Yeah, just want to add, the props and state of the component should only be stuff that pertain to that component. I think Aaron said that before, but just to reiterate that, like any props that normally change in a component most likely should cause the component to re-render. If you have some props in the component that don't have anything to do with the component, they shouldn't be in there.
Yeah, and that's a good way to think about it, is that, for the typical case, your component has the information that it needs to render itself, and it doesn't have anything else. And then when those things change, if it as long as it follows that rule, if it has the things it needs to know to render itself, then when those things change, it probably needs to re-render. And that's why the simple case of just checking equality works, especially with the immutable data set, which I'm not talking about. Next, I think, is more slide stuff. So I'm going to go to code again. I'm going to hop out of here. Sorry, everybody. I know terminal's not super entertaining. Oops, wrong. So this is, I'm going to show this whole app. This is where I'm going to show you guys the HTML file to start with. So when you're using React as your main platform, your framework, typically you'll have an index.html file that looks like this. It looks super uninteresting. It does whatever you're doing in the head elements. Your body has whatever style you care about. You might include normalized.css like I'm doing. And then your script tag is in the body or wherever. And it includes your bundle. And your bundle was built by whatever build tools you choose. And that's like the entry point for your application. So hopefully super simple index.html, and then we'll get into the more complicated bit. How does this work? So this is my kind of initial state object here. I don't know if I want to go through this line by line. I'm just going to give a kind of a brief overview, and then I'll let you guys ask questions if you have them. And we can talk about it super in depth afterwards if you want. I'd be happy to talk about this for hours because I love it. So this is my initial data set. The number on each of these is how many times, I'm just going to point. That feels easiest. So this is where I define the color of each quadrant. The number is how many times it's been clicked. The middle number is how many times the middle one has been clicked, and the inner number is how many times the inner one has been clicked and the color. So it's just these, this pair of data that gets, for each component, and the parents have to know about their children in order to render them. So that's why it's these four big objects. So then,
Is that state for your application?
this is, yeah, it's not set yet here. This is just me defining it up above the component, and then I'll set it in the component itself as the initial state. But this is kind of just keeping it out of the component, so it's a little bit cleaner. The next thing is completely outside of state, and outside of the components is the render calls themselves. It turns out to be easier for some technical reasons, just keep track of the counts outside so that I'm not having extra render calls and messing up my whole life. So we get into it. We have a big, semi-big, that's one screen, of my app component. I define it the way I define the other components. And it has a constructor, which we're all PHP developers. We kind of know what constructors are. Constructors work a little bit differently, but not so differently that we don't see what's happening. They call the parent constructor passing in props. This is where I set the state. This is what I was talking about. So initial quadrants is that object from above. It's being set as state on the component, and then again the state of whether or not should component update should be used. And then I'm doing that silly bind thing again. If you guys really want to know what something about it, but you have to do it when you're using the class syntax for both of my methods. So these are my two methods. Handle toggle should component update. This gets called when I click on that checkbox. Handle change gets called whenever you click on anything else. It takes the quadrant ID, the index, and I don't remember what I did for quadrant IDs, but it's something like some combination of top or left, middle, thing, whatever. Oh. So then the render function itself has JSX, obviously. This is a super long line. Sorry about that, guys. But for the most part, these top two things are the wrapping HTML, the div with width and height, 100%. The input itself, which is the checkbox. And then, of course, I'm defining the on change there. And then, spitting out, whether it's on or off. And then I get into it. I have a div with my styles.container, which is defined way at the bottom, and my four quadrants. And, each quadrant takes the updating function, like whether or not it should be updating, I'm sorry. The on click, what happens when it gets clicked, it calls handle change. Then I provide a quadrant ID. So 0 through 3, and that maps to the counts above. And then this is some fancy new-ish JavaScript syntax. It's really just dumping the values from the quadrants array into the props. And so here is my quadrant component. It's relatively simple. Here's the first instance of me defining should component update. You see that it's a little bit more complicated than you would see in a typical app because I have to care about whether or not I actually want to use it. In a typical app, you always want to use it unless you have some special condition which you get to control. So here I'm saying like if next props.updating is true, then I care about using this. I return the result from shallow compare, which is true or false. If it's true, we re-render. If it's false, we do not re-render. Here's my handle click. I'm going to kind of gloss over that a little bit. The render function itself, again, you see a wrapper div, a span with a count of clicks being rendered out, and then the middle component, which takes the number, the color, and the quadrant ID, and then the inner color, inner number, the on-click itself, updating. Sorry, this is a little bit complicated, but I thought it was fun, so I wanted to talk about it. And then the middle component, and then they start to just look like each other. They're doing the same thing. They probably could have been the same component if I was a little bit more clever and wanted to be more complicated, but here I get to show 3 different components being rendered and doing different things. So when you click on the inside one, it bubbles up this callback chain, increments the number on it, state gets changed at the top, and then state bubbles back down and re-renders what needs to be re-rendered. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. So that's, here I have styles at the bottom. And so that's the interesting things about this. Any questions before I move on? What's up?
I'm kind of surprised to see incrementing the inside of the plan there. Is that a choice that you made to not the logic of implementing counts like in the
You mean here?
logic? Yeah. Like
I mean,
plus and then, you know.
it's just a concise thing. It's just for being whatever, having 1 fewer lines of code. It's
I would thought that would go in like the regular state change or handle click or whatever.
so this is keeping track of how many times it's rendered, and that's a little bit of a special case because I couldn't keep track of whether or not something was rendered in state or props itself, because when it's a little bit complicated, but the idea was that when I updated render, it would, if it's in state, it has to re-render. So then I update render, then it's in state, it has to re-render. So that sucks, and like there's probably a way around it. I didn't feel like it. I just moved it out, and I didn't care about it. So that's why you see this happening in the render function, because it's literally counting how many times the render function runs. So it executes, it does the increment in the render function itself. What's up, Paul?
But I think part of the rest of the comment is like the fact that you're actually doing like
Inline?
the definition of the span.
Yeah.
And so like if it makes you feel better, like you could alternatively like above that return statement just say mid render counts by the plus, and then you could just take away the increment from the span definition, right?
Yeah.
Same idea, right?
Yeah.
Isn't something
I
you
had
can
one
normally
like kind of clicks, but you're not.
Yeah, so the clicks get counted and they're stored in a different variable. But the render count, again, has to be outside. And it's like a special case, and it's weird. And it's the weirdest part about all of this. So
well, really, the demo is about should update render, right?
Yeah.
So it's only because you're using shallow compare. Like if you expanded the logic, you would just compare whether or not all the attributes except for my click count.
he gets it. That's absolutely right. So that's absolutely right. And I didn't feel like thinking about it, so I just moved it out and didn't store it in state. But that is how, yes, you're right. That's how you would do that. Any more questions about this code?
Does the bubbling come from the DOM and that click bubbling up, or is that inside of?
So when the bubbling itself, the interaction with the DOM, when I click, React takes that event, and then everything else happens inside the virtual DOM. I actually take it and I do stop propagation in all my handle clicks. So you'll see me forcing right up there the click event from bubbling up all the way, because I decided that I'm going to handle how the data bubbles up. So it's bubbling up through my handle change method. So that's all stuff that I wrote and I included in my own code. So it is handled by React, but I told it don't handle it. I'm going to handle it. Anything else?
Where do you actually? Sorry.
Go ahead.
So I know this is a demo, but is it a common practice in React to put all your classes in one index.js file?
No, absolutely not. If I ran across this in our actual code base, I'd be super angry about it.
So do you use a compiler to put those all together to output the final?
Yeah. I mean, you're using a compiler to run the JSX anyway. And I would use the compiler even if I wasn't using JSX, just for common JS. So you can see at the top, JSX gives me the ability to import things. Or not JSX, I'm sorry, common JS gives me the ability to import things. So I'm importing, these node modules that are stored on NPM's package management system, React DOM, React add-on, shallow compare, React itself. And this is where I would do my own components. So I just do import, my own component from, you know, my file system, file name, you know, now I can, in my render functions, I get to use, you know, my own component. So that's typically, that's kind of what our things look like, is that at the top we import the various libraries that we have to use in this particular component. Then you'll see us importing our, the other components that we render inside of this component, and then when you see us reusing them. So absolutely not will I ever, you know, in a real application put 4 components all in one file. You see that in demos a lot just because it's easier. Any more questions? Jeff, you had one.
Where's the inner, inside, the middle, inside the...
So here's the first one. Here's the div, the input for the checkbox, and here are the 4 quadrants. So the 4 quadrants being, you know, the 4 big outer boxes. And then inside the quadrant component, which is that line right there. I don't know, how well do you guys see my cursor? See it? Okay, so there's the quadrant. Sorry, I'm jumping around. I know it's Vim, sorry. And inside the quadrant component itself, you hop down here, and this is the render of the quadrant. You see middle. And then you see the middle component, which is inside its render, you get to see inner. And then in the inner component, which is defined here, you get to see the stuff that's inside. And that's actually like, you know, that question kind of gets to the heart of like what's cool about React, is that, you know, I talked about this like hierarchy of stuff, and this is where it starts. Like this is the entry point into the rendering of my application. You don't see like a big complicated nesting of stuff. You see me using the quadrant component 4 times and passing in different data at each instance of those. And then the nesting happens when I get into quadrant. That's when I care about what quadrant renders. So quadrant renders, you know, its middle component, and that nesting happens, and it's, you know, it's a big tree in the virtual DOM. But when I'm looking at the middle component, I know that I only care about, you know, I only care about this box and this box. You know, these are rendering 4 times. But when I'm in this middle component, I don't need to know anything about this. I don't need to know anything about the application as a whole. I'm told what I need to care about. I'm in that middle.js file, and while I'm in middle.js, I don't worry about anything else. And that's what makes React fun to work in.
You could put the middle in something that wasn't a quadrant.
Absolutely. You can reuse that anywhere, as long as you know, by setting up, there's something I'm not going to talk about a whole lot, but you can define your prop types in a component. You can tell it by defining your prop types. It's a little bit like defining your attributes on a class in PHP. You're saying that this component expects these props. And as long as whatever you're using gives me that props, I don't care about the rest of the tree. I just care that you gave me what I care about, so I'm going to render myself. And you only have to think about that.
Yeah, like piggyback on that.
Yeah.
So just anybody who's like big on Angular, a lot of Angular experience. One interesting distinction and how you can kind of see how all this comes together. So like in Angular, by default, like you think of scope as state or props, kind of similar thing. And in Angular, like you've got that same tree, but like it automatically inherits from the parent, and everybody's listening to the same stuff, the same scope, essentially, because it inherits. In React, like you have to explicitly pass things down, so it like makes it more reusable, keep those like distinctions and like boundaries between your components a lot more clear, a lot more separated. Yeah,
and Paul, of the people I know in here anyway, he has the most React and Angular experience. Like as a, you know, he's used React at Synapse and he's using Angular now at his current job. So Jeff, I know you specifically had interest in learning about the differences between them. The guy in that back far corner knows more about it than me. So questions on my,
Just clarification, I clearly have been blessed in being isolated from JS for a while. Is JSX like an equivalent to CoffeeScript and kind of like what it is?
Sort of, in that it's a language that has to be kind of transpiled. It's not in and of itself a programming language. It's more like an XML. It's like JSX is to XML what CoffeeScript is to JavaScript. Is kind of a way to think about it. I hope that's not super confusing, but it's ultimately what happens is when the JSX transpiler, which is a word that means compiler, essentially runs over it, it converts it into JavaScript methods, and then those methods are function calls, and then those map directly to, you know, and it looks pretty ugly, and that's why JSX is around, because it makes, you know, and handles this like nested hierarchical declarative kind of render style possible and friendlier and nice. Does that answer? Does that help?
You can layer things like that too. I think if I remember, you can layer like TypeScript on top of JSX, one way or the other, in your build stuff, and if I remember right, it will work.
The JSX thing is really like Facebook's into that. That's like equivalent things available in PHP and HTML.
Yeah.
Okay, you can just put HTML directly in with their own. Looks very similar. So it's kind of like a Facebook concept that they add to every language.
You can use like here doc syntax in PHP and stuff like that, and usually your editor and stuff will take care of that.
Right. But I mean, HHPM adds the identical thing.
Right.
It's XHP and
Right.
HHPM.
Okay. I didn't actually know about that. That's cool.
Yeah, it's like a super Facebook thing to add to languages that you just write the HTML inline.
Right.
And it handles all of the escaping and compiling and anything.
Does React use Node?
Sort of, not necessarily. So React is separate from Node. Typically, when I work in React, I use Node as my like the npm package manager, and that's kind of the easiest way to go about it. You don't have to. Typically, in like a bigger production app, like you're gonna be killing yourself if you don't. But you don't have to be using Node, an actual Node server, in any way at all. However, if you dig more into React, you'll start learning about things like server-side rendering. So that's how when you make a request to the server, it builds the actual, it runs through the app and all the markup and stuff on the server side and serves up actual HTML. And that's typically done in Node. And I don't think there's a way around that. There might be, but it'd be a pain. And that's done in Node because it's executing JavaScript, and that's the easiest way to execute JavaScript to server side. There's probably other ways to do it, but so no is the short answer, and the other thing I said is the long answer. Any more? I'm going to talk about data model stuff here. I'm going to gloss over it a lot because it gets complicated. It's a big topic. So before I move on, anything? Cool. We'll have more questions at the end if you guys want. So data model in React. If you're anything like me, at this point you're thinking about how a lot of this stuff sounds kind of a little bit impractical, because it sounds like you have to have your application know everything about itself and then pass pieces down through this tree, and then you have these callbacks that bubble stuff back up the tree, and then in a big thing, it sounds unmanageable. And it is unmanageable. And so in a big application, in a big React application, that's typically not what you do. You do something similar, but it lives a little bit next to it. So for smaller applications, what I did in the demo is appropriate. You have a big wrapper component that knows everything about itself and then kind of controls the insides of itself. But when you have a multi-page, single-page app, and one page is managing users, and one page is managing a list of albums, and the other page is managing search results, and all this stuff, it's too much for one big component to handle at the top for you to manage yourself. So that's why we don't use state and props for that. This is kind of the first, state and props is like the first data management, data model kind of thing. You said state on the top, you pass everything down as props. Your components themselves can keep state. It gets messy in a big thing. So the next thing is Facebook invented this idea. I keep saying Facebook invented without actually knowing. I'm pretty sure Facebook came up with the idea of Flux. Flux is a fancy name for this concept of, I'm going to show a whole thing that you'll see a million times if you get into React. There's like a little infographic. I'll describe it in a minute. So the next thing that's kind of come up and is really popular right now is Redux. And then Facebook, again, invents this thing called Relay. So we all learned about Relay a year ago. So Flux. Flux is this idea. Flux is the idea that your components know about actions. Actions are things that happen when a user does something. The component themselves calls an action when you click on something, calls an action when it's loaded, calls an action whenever you in your code decide that the action should be called. The action is dispatched with an event handler. JavaScript is event-driven, so there's all these cool event things you can do. You dispatch this action. Stores listen for actions that they care about. So stores are things like, you would think of them as like your models. I think there's a concept of store in the old Backbone.js. I think it's probably similar in Angular. They might call it model. And then your view. The view is your component. And the views subscribe to stores. This is again similar to the idea of Angular, where the view itself, you have this two-way data binding that bind up to these stores. The difference is that when you change the data on the page in a React view, rather than changing the store directly, you just call the action again, goes through the dispatcher, and then it bubbles down. So now instead of storing the application state in the component at the top, we're storing it in a couple stores. The views listen to the stores that they care about, and the views fire actions when things happen. The stores listen to the actions that they care about, and then that all bubbles around. It's nice. There are problems. One of the problems was that they didn't write any code. They just invented Flux and told everybody about it. So then there are a million implementations of it. We used Fluxor for a while. There are a bunch of these. Then Facebook wrote some code, and now everybody who uses Flux uses Facebook's version. It was a kind of a segmented world for a while. We moved away from it eventually to Redux. It's super popular right now. Everybody loves it for a lot of reasons. I'm not going to get into them, barring any questions. If you guys have questions about it, I'll talk about it. But it introduces this idea of a single application store. So now rather than having multiple store files, all your application data is stored in one single data tree that Redux manages. And then you interact with that data through reducers. You have actions also again, middleware, and then there's this really cool DevTools thing that pops up on the right of your screen and it shows you your current application state. Now, when you're using Redux, a single application state and immutable data all together at the same time, you get some really cool ideas and fancy things that you can get. One is that you can get from a user, a tester, a copy of their current application state, load it into your application on your dev machine, and then replay exactly what they did if you set up your app to do that. It's one of the coolest things to see when it happens and when it happens right. It's a little bit fidgety. You don't want to do stuff like this in production, but it's a really cool debugging tool. We don't actually do it. It's hard. It's not hard, but it's too hard. But life is awesome. Redux makes life a lot better in a lot of ways over Flux for some esoteric reasons. What's that? Yeah. There's a lot less, like when you're not writing store files for every single thing you care about, you're just a lot less boilerplate. It gives you some cool tools, and it's just a funner way to write a front-end application. So next is Relay. Relay is Facebook's thing. They love it. Nobody else uses it. That's not true, but basically nobody else uses it. They came out with it a year ago. Paul, Gordon, and I all went to the React conference, and they were super excited about it. I'm going to show some bullet points. So it's a single application state. It's like Redux in that. The components, again, Facebook is really interested in this idea of the component knowing things about itself. So the components then declare the data that they're interested in. And because Facebook is all about graph stuff, because everything Facebook does is in a graph, They've decided that Relay works like a graph. So the components declare the section of the graph that they're interested in. And Relay is this library that maintains the state itself. The fun thing about Relay is that it handles communication with the server. So in Redux, I write execjar or fetch requests to my API. And then I bubble those into reducers. Reducers change, and my views change because the reducers change. Relay, however, deals with it. And if you're like me, you say, what? How can that be? Like, I need some sort of server. They have this GraphQL server thing that you can use and run on your server side. I haven't even looked at it. Gordon's looked at it a little bit. It's available now. A year ago, it wasn't available. You can mess with it now. You can set up a GraphQL server now, but it's like a huge refactor. I don't know. I haven't heard of many people actually doing this. Facebook does it all the time. They love it. They're trying to promote it. It's probably fun to play with, but I haven't done it yet. Check it out if you like cool things.
Farthest I've seen it go is someone asking, should we try GraphQL?
Yeah, on your in your free time, you should. Yeah.
There's other options to it too. I'd be happy to talk to you.
Yeah, Gordon probably knows more about it than he definitely knows more about it than me. I don't know how much anybody else here knows about it, but he's probably the guy to talk to. This guy right here. What's up?
Second question. More often than Relay, I see Reflux. How does Reflux play into?
Reflux is a Flux implementation. So remember when I was talking about how Facebook didn't write a Flux implementation? Reflux is one of the ones that somebody else wrote. So we use Fluxor. Reflux exists as a competitor of Fluxor. Then Facebook made Flux, and I don't think most of the rest of those things are used anymore.
Out of curiosity, you said they didn't write any code, but was there a stated convention? Like, is that something that's component level, or do you say, I'm gonna have like 4 or 5 stores?
Yeah, it's separate from the component. You have like your user store, which keeps track of your current user, for example. Like we would do things like, this is my current user store, and that's the current user object. And then I have, if I'm like an admin and I'm managing users, I have both the current user store and the user's store, and the user store keeps track of the list of users that I'm managing. And then you might have any number of stores, and you kind of end up blowing up with a lot of stores in a big application, which is why we don't use it. Any more questions? I'm going to move on to some code and a little bit more demoing next. Questions? I'm sure we'll have questions in a minute. I'm showing awful code to you people. Okay, more demos. This is actually my last slide too, so we're just talking now. We're all developers, just having fun. So, like 6 months ago, I gave a talk on Laravel. I don't know anything about Laravel, but I learned a little bit about it, and I presented it to the group. I wrote this stupid little app. It's a search box. You type into it, and it searches the Spotify API, and it returns albums. You click into one, and it shows you the album. I'll show the Laravel code a little bit, but I wanted to show this because I modified that original example. I changed it from being a template-driven, old style, serving HTML PHP app into an API, which I then use in a React application that I built. So just for the sake of showing how it works, I'm going to show how it works. Search for a band. Oh, that happens.
Looks like something.
Indeed. That might have been a CSR. No, that wasn't CSRF. I swear I made sure this stuff works.
It's on my machine.
Did you load it? Yeah, so refresh helped. Always refresh. So search, simple search results, simple album. Yeah, here we go. So I'll talk about this code in a minute. First, I'm going to show the same. I'm going to go ahead and just refresh right away. This is the same thing happening in a React app. Search for the same thing, click, and do the same things. It looked a little bit faster here. That's part of what I built into the application. Is you click on things, it kind of does some caching and stuff. React is pretty fast at rendering in general, but it's like they're all HTTP requests. Like it's a bottleneck's a bottleneck, network stuff. Anyway, so code. First, I'm going to show my endpoints in Laravel, my API. And I'm in the wrong place. I absolutely can. I actually had like a bunch of problems getting this to run again. If anybody like was ever trying to rerun that like old Laravel example, it just was super broken for I don't know why. So I had to like yeah, exactly. It's just like something changed. I don't know what it was, but I had to spin it up with the Homestead VM instead of what I was using before, just a normal virtual machine. So now I have to look at this and remember how this works. I think that all my stuff is in app, all my stuff is in HTTP and controllers. I'm not going to go through how every single thing works. Nope, it's not home. It's an album controller. So those of you probably, even those of you who saw this, don't remember what it looked like. But I have two. I had a search method and an album method. So the controller method that got called when I landed on the search page, and the controller method that got called when I landed on the album page. I took all the guts of each of those methods out, put them into top level functions, and then I created two new methods. One REST search for my RESTful API, and another called REST get album. And those are my API endpoints. You can see the guts of this information. Again, it's all in GitHub. I can talk about it. Also, it's probably not the best way to do things in Laravel. I don't know a whole lot about it, but it works. So that's the PHP app. Simple. I had to enable CSRF, which was a little bit harder in Laravel than I expected it to be, but not like crazy hard, because I wanted to be able to use my cross-domain, API requests without.
Did you need cores?
What's that?
Did you say CSRF?
Yeah. Sorry, I did mean cores.
Okay.
I did not use any whatever like token stuff, whatever that actually means. Yeah, so I had to set up cores, so that I could use my API from a different domain. Again, a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. I'd be happy to talk about it. I'm probably not an expert. There's probably people who know way more about cores and that sort of HTTP stuff. I bet Josh knows the most about it. So we're moving on to React examples. So my actual React app in here. And this example is our template at Synapse. When we build a front-end application, this is the code we start with. It's more complicated than what you might need for a small, simple thing, but we're building full, semi-complicated applications in it to super complicated. And this is what we use as a base template. It's all open source. If you guys want to play with it, you're more than welcome to do so. You can just check it out, run npm install, and then there's a start command, and it'll spin up a little server, and you can start playing with it. It does hot reloading, so as you change code and save it, it refreshes in your browser automatically. And there's all sorts of Sass compiling and whatever going on in there too that I don't know anything about. But I don't have to. So in my code, I have shared UI components, and this is where I put everything. So I'll go back to the actual app to show as I go through these components. And here we can start talking about a lot of the ecosystem of React, because my talk is essentially over. So I'm just showing a little bit of code, and I'm happy to go into more details about whatever you guys see. I'll be showing how we use Redux. There's a whole build step we can get into. I prefer not to. I hate talking about it, but it's really important if you're building a big thing. Oh, Laravel is a PHP framework. People love it.
It's probably like
the most popular
coding writer to Remote.
Yeah.
Laravel.
Ooh, whoa.
It's just about done at this point.
So yeah, it's a competitor to Cake. Symfony, Laravel, Cake, CodeIgniter, Kohana. These are all PHP frameworks, and Laravel is among them, and it does the same things.
It uses like the front end, the HTTP portion of Symfony.
Yeah, it's got Symfony stuff built into it. I forgot about that. We use Gordon. What do we use? What's our framework? Our Silex. We use Silex.
Yes. Microframe.
I've been writing Node a lot, you guys. Sorry. So these are my React components. I'll go through these a little bit more in depth. Feel free to ask questions and steer the discussion in different directions as you see things that look interesting. What's up?
On the demo, I saw when you were doing the search and display, the URL was actually changed. I wasn't expecting that from, but I was thinking it was going to be a single page.
It is a single page. So one of the things, one of the cool libraries that you've now directed us to talking about, oh, I just shocked myself, you guys, is React Router. So it's a library that plugs into React and it lets you mess with URLs. So when I go to my URL that I shared, I get the same thing as I got, when I grabbed it from the URI, the bar, the URL bar. So you have access to that, through the window dot whatever it is. You just change the URL all you want, and that's all they do. So I will show that being set up until somebody tells me to do something else.
Under the hood, it's doing like a history push.
Yeah, so they have like a history wrapper.
HTML5 API to horribly hack your stuff anymore.
Right. I haven't actually looked under the hood at the router. So this is where I set up my my routes. Anybody using Symfony or any other thing will see some similar looking things, except it's in React, so they're components. I have my root route. The cool thing about it is that because React is like by definition this like hierarchical data structure of components, the router is too. And so as you're nesting down, if I have like a little piece of the route, for example, that I wanted to change, say I wanted to update the URI as I searched with a query string, that way I can share my searches around. One of the things I might do is nest a route under search here. Something like this. This code won't run, it doesn't matter. I'll set my own thing, path equals, results, or it doesn't even need that. Then you set like a query, and React and the router will work together to render nested down into what you need to render. And that means also a cool thing that if I change the route, I'm not super confident about what I'm about to say, but I'm pretty sure if I change the URI, it only, as long as I have should component update implemented across down my whole hierarchy, it should only change the things that that matter, like as you're linking around and stuff. I think if you just change the URI and hit enter, it always does a hard refresh. But as you're linking around, it's only going to re-render the things that need to re-render.
So does that, I guess, in using the route, does that kind of impact maybe the paradigm of how you design the application? I'm kind of thinking of like maybe more desktop-like application where you've got menu bars and you can open up sub-windows and sub-windows. I'm kind of wondering how that kind of aligns with a URL-driven I'm at /foo/bar/zaz. How do I recover all the state from maybe the side panel that I had open, the top-down palette that I had open up here?
So you don't have to use router if you prefer not to. State typically, when you're getting into a more complicated application, you're going to be storing state separately from your components anyway. And in fact, it's gotten to a point where most React developers will look at state being stored in component as a negative thing, especially for larger applications. So your state exists separate from your components that are being rendered. So you can still have state in Redux, which is what we were talking about, or Flux stores, or Relay, Relay and GraphQL if you're at Facebook. So that state is set and exists and only modifies as the result of actions. And if I'm looking at something else, it's not doing a hard refresh and like clearing state or anything like that. I'm on a different URI, but because the reload didn't have to happen to display that URI, my state is exactly the same. So whatever you had stored in your previous screens is still there unless you deliberately clear it, which may make sense to do depending on your use cases. Does that answer the question?
Yes. Is the data moving between page views? Is it getting sent back to the server and held onto, or is there local?
Page, any communication with the server, unless you're using Relay, is controlled by you. So as I move around, when I load the page, I hit to the server, my web server. I think I'm using. I'm running this in like a Node development server just to serve it up and be a simple Node development environment. We use Nginx for serving our little front ends. So that was the first HTML request or server request. I don't have to do a server request to display a new page. I don't have to refresh like the actual browser. When I use like link to link around, I'll show. So here's when I type darling side and hit enter. I am firing off an action in Redux that says, 1, go start this API request. 2, set state that says I'm loading data. And then I respond in the view in the component itself to the fact that I have that state of like a loading flag and show the loader. That's that stupid little GIF that you guys saw. Oh, there it is. And then once the data is returned from the server, I then set state again, and I say, all right, loading, we're not loading anymore. And here's the response. And the response goes into state. The component says, has told, Redux, it says, I'm interested in that set of state. So when it changes, let me know. It changes when the response comes back. The component re-renders itself, and now it has data to render, so it conditionally, and I can show the code. But I was talking about something else, sorry. So when I set up a link, we need to wrap up? Okay, we're almost done. Okay. So when I click a link, it takes me to the other page. The server request doesn't happen. It happens right away because I tell it to, hey, when I load this page, do a server request. But it does that because I told it to as a response to the action. I was going to get into the code a little bit more, but I need to stop talking. I've talked too much already. The code is all available to look at. I can post links around. It's kind of in a bunch of different repos. I'm also going to be available after this. If you guys have any more questions, I'm going to hang out and you guys can talk to me about it.
Make sure to post the slides and any repo links on the meetup page.
I absolutely will. The slides exist in a code base, so you'll have to download it, npm install, and npm start. So that'll be test number 1, installing npm and then getting the slides to run. Well, thanks, guys. So, do you have things to say?
Not too much. Go ahead and stop the recording, I guess.
Let's go on this thing.
Bye, everybody online. So, we have some things to raffle off here. Thank you, Eric, for